In 1815, a single family knew the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo before any government in Europe did. While armies clashed and kings waited nervously for news, a Rothschild courier was already riding hard toward the coast, carrying word of Napoleon's defeat. But before we uncover how one family built the greatest financial empire in history, welcome to Money Records, where money, power, and history collide. By the time official messengers reached London, Nathan Rothschild had already positioned himself in the bond market and made a fortune that would have taken most men 100 lifetimes to accumulate. This was not luck. This was not coincidence. This was the result of a system, built over generations, in the most hostile conditions imaginable, that turned a single Jewish family trapped in a narrow ghetto alley into the most powerful financial dynasty the world has ever seen. This is the real story of the Rothschilds. To understand the Rothschilds, you have to first understand the world they were born into, because it was a world designed to keep them poor, powerless, and invisible. By the 10th century, Christianity dominated every corner of Europe. Political power, land ownership, legal rights, all of it was tied directly to religion. To be Jewish in medieval Europe was to exist outside the protection of the law. Jews could not own land. They could not join trade guilds. They could not hold public office. In many cities, they were not even allowed to live among the general population. In Frankfurt, one of the most important commercial cities in the Holy Roman Empire, the city authorities in 1462 forced every Jewish resident into a single street outside the city walls. It was barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. It was called the Judengasse, the Jewish alley. At its peak, over 3,000 people were crammed into this one street, in tightly packed houses, stacked 3 and 4 stories high. The gates at each end were locked every night and all day on Sundays and Christian holidays. Jews were forbidden from leaving without wearing a distinctive badge identifying them as Jewish. They had no political voice, no legal recourse, and no way out. It was in this street, in this suffocating, overcrowded, deliberately constructed cage, that the Rothschild family lived for nearly 300 years. The name itself comes from this place. The buildings on the Judengasse were not identified by numbers, but by the signs hanging above their doors. One family's house bore a red shield, Rothschild in German. And so they were called the Rothschilds. The earliest recorded use of the name dates to 1528, though the family had lived there long before. The man who would change everything was born in that alley in 1744. His name was Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Because Jews were barred from most professions, finance had become one of the few areas where Jewish families could operate. Christianity at the time strictly forbade lending money at interest, called usury, which meant this enormously profitable business was left almost entirely to Jewish merchants. The Rothschilds had been involved in currency exchange and money lending for generations, and Mayer absorbed this knowledge from childhood. But Mayer had something the previous generations did not, an exceptional eye for opportunity and a genius for building trust with powerful people. He developed a specialty in rare coins and antiquities, building one of the finest collections in the region. This was not mere hobby, it was strategy. Wealthy noblemen and aristocrats were passionate collectors, and Mayer used this shared interest as a doorway into rooms he would otherwise never have been allowed to enter. His most important connection came in 1769, when he caught the attention of Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse, one of the wealthiest rulers in all of Europe. Wilhelm was so impressed by Mayer's knowledge and reliability that he appointed him Hofjudy Court Jew in 1785, entrusting him with the management of his personal fortune. This was the break that changed history. Wilhelm of Hesse was not merely rich. He was in the business of renting out his own soldiers, the famous Hessian mercenaries, to foreign governments, including the British Crown during the American Revolutionary War. The revenues flowing through his accounts were staggering, and Mayer Rothschild now had control of them. Over the following decades, Mayer invested those funds, collected fees, and reinvested the profits. More importantly, he used this relationship as proof of his credibility, and began attracting other aristocratic clients across the Holy Roman Empire. Mayer's true masterstroke was not financial. It was architectural. He designed a family structure that was, at its core, a banking network, and he used his 5 sons as the pillars. Understanding that no single city could contain the opportunity that existed across Europe, Mayer deliberately placed each son in a different financial capital. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt to manage the original family business. Solomon moved to Vienna, the seat of the Habsburg Empire. Nathan, the most brilliant of the 5, was sent to London in 1798, initially to trade textiles but quickly pivoting to finance. Kalman, who renamed himself Karl, established operations in Naples, giving the family a foothold in southern Europe. And Jacob, who went by James, set up the Paris branch, positioning the family at the heart of post-revolutionary French finance. What made this network extraordinary was not just its geographic reach, it was the communication system that connected it. The Rothschilds developed a private courier network that was faster and more reliable than any government postal service in Europe. Coded letters traveled between brothers constantly, sharing intelligence on government finances, political shifts, bond prices, and currency movements. While other bankers were working with yesterday's information, the Rothschilds were operating on tomorrow's. It was this network that gave Nathan his edge at Waterloo. The family's couriers reached London before official government dispatches, giving him hours, perhaps a full day, to act in the bond markets before anyone else knew what had happened. Through the first half of the 19th century, the Rothschilds became the bankers of Europe itself. When governments needed to finance wars, infrastructure, or stabilize their currencies, they came to the Rothschilds. The Paris branch under James became the primary banker to the French government and personally financed the construction of France's first major railway network. The Vienna branch under Salomon financed the first steam-powered railway on the European continent, the Kaiser Ferdinand's Nordbahn, connecting Vienna to the coal-rich regions of the north. In 1818, Holy Roman Emperor Francis II granted all 5 brothers the title of Baron, a profound symbolic moment. A Jewish family, which had lived for centuries in a locked ghetto with no legal rights, had been elevated to the European nobility. The scale of their lending was historic. By 1850, the Paris branch alone had grown from an equivalent of $5 million in 1820 to over $500 million. Combined, the 5 Rothschild branches represented the largest private accumulation of capital in the world, functioning, as one historian noted, like a 19th-century version of the International Monetary Fund, stabilizing currencies, issuing sovereign loans, and setting the financial terms on which governments could operate. No major European war, revolution, or political transition in the 19th century happened without the Rothschilds being involved in financing one side or the other, and sometimes both. Beyond government lending, the Rothschilds made some of the most consequential private investments of the century. In 1875, the British government needed to urgently purchase a controlling stake in the Suez Canal, the strategic waterway connecting Europe to Asia, from a financially desperate Egyptian government. Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli needed £4 million within days, far faster than Parliament could approve. He turned to Nathan's son, Lionel de Rothschild, who provided the entire sum overnight, with the British government as collateral. Britain secured the canal. The Rothschilds collected their fee. In 1883, the family funded the development of the Baku oil fields in present-day Azerbaijan, at the time the largest oil operation outside America, directly challenging the Rockefeller monopoly. They also became major shareholders in De Beers, the diamond monopoly, and in Rio Tinto, one of the world's largest mining companies. In 1868, they purchased Chateau Mouton, one of the most celebrated wine estates in Bordeaux, a property still owned by the family today. The 20th century was brutal for the Rothschilds. The Naples branch collapsed in 1900 when the last male heir died childless. The German branch fragmented when the 2 heirs produced 11 daughters and no sons, dissolving the fortune across multiple families. The Austrian branch was devastated when Nazi Germany annexed Austria in 1938. Their entire banking operation was seized and sold for a fraction of its value. One family member was arrested, attempting to flee, and released only after paying a ransom of $21 million, the largest in history at that time, effectively bankrupting the branch. The Nazis catalogued and seized over 5,000 individual artworks and objects from the Rothschild collections, the vast majority of which were never returned. The Paris branch was nationalized by the French socialist government in 1981. Only the English branch survived the century, with its wealth and structure meaningfully intact. Today, the Rothschild name still exists in finance, a respected but far smaller advisory firm, a shadow of the Empire Mayor built from a locked alley in Frankfurt. But the real legacy of the Rothschilds is not the wealth itself. It is the proof of what is possible when discipline, intelligence, and long-term thinking are combined, even against every conceivable disadvantage. They were locked in a ghetto. They were denied rights given to every other citizen. They were despised, persecuted, and ultimately had their fortunes systematically destroyed by the most violent regime in modern history. And yet, for nearly a century, they were the most powerful financial force on Earth. That is not a conspiracy. That is one of history's greatest stories of human ambition,